Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about the premier event in college basketball. That is right. The Final Four has finally arrived. And I got to say, this one just feels different. Most years, I feel like you get to this stage and it kind of feels like everything's winding down. There's less games, there's less teams. It always feels like there's a team that doesn't belong or there's a team that is just like for certainly going to win. Like each of the last 2 years, it was really hard to talk yourself into an outcome that wasn't UConn winning at all. But this year, we have got four outstanding teams, 4 1 seeds, the four best teams in the sport all season long, four great coaches, four great rosters, and hopefully it delivers with two good games here on Saturday in a national championship game. But I, for one, am very excited. Like we finally have a Final Four where all four teams would absolutely be a deserving champion, absolutely deserve to be here, and all four of them can absolutely beat each other. And I'm super intrigued to see how this one is going to play out. On this episode, we're going to talk about it from DFS purposes or for player proper betting purposes. We're going to break down both of the games this Saturday for the Final Four, tell you what you can expect for each game, as well as who needs to be in or out of your DFS lineups and on your slips and on your parlays for player props and betting. Now, this is a big-time episode for us. This one gets a lot of views every single year. So if you're new to the channel, please help me out. Hit that subscribe button. We are closing in on our goal of 1,000 subscribers. We only need about 40 more, and that way you can be with us for next college basketball season. We're also going to have a showdown episode for the national championship game, but we cover all sports here at Mike's Money Picks, so we're going to be rolling right into golf season with the Masters being next week, and then we've got NFL season, best ball season, and college football season before college basketball comes around. So I hope that you will subscribe and stick around with us for all of that. Anyway, we've got two awesome games to break down, so let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so one thing that I believe to be the most important when you are building those DFS lineups on DraftKings and FanDuel for a 2-game slate like this one, and even more so for a 1-game slate if you're playing Showdown, is telling a story with your lineup, coming up with a narrative of how you think that each game is going to play out, and then building your lineup how the fantasy points will be distributed based off of how that plays out. So it requires a certain level of thought, right? Like you have to have a certain knowledge of ball to kind of anticipate how a game is going to play out, and then you also have to have the second component, which is if the game plays out in this way, who is going to benefit or not benefit from a fantasy scoring perspective. And so you can kind of build your lineups off of that. Another thing that I think is important to think about is the third layer to it, which is how is this going to be different from everybody else in the field? Because if you want to win a big GPP, there's a 20K to first contest this week. If you want to win a big one and you don't want to split any money, you're going to have to look to get really unique. A lot of people would advise leaving salary on the table. That is not my style. That is generally not what I do. I am generally hunting the optimal and trying to build a lineup that makes sense. And usually that does not involve leaving a whole lot of salary on the table. If you choose to do that, though, I wouldn't fault you for it because it's certainly a way that you can make your lineup more unique. Now, before we start talking about the individual games, I do want to say that I do believe that, when it's important when you look at a DraftKings slate, especially a small slate like this one, to think about the questions that the slate is asking you, right? And last year at the Final Four, the question was Edey or not to Edey, because you had Zach Edey that was dramatically priced higher than everybody else on the slate. And, he had a juicy matchup against NC State, and you better have played him because if you didn't, he was absolutely going to wreck your lineups if he smashed, right? This slate, I think it asks you to make the choice between Broom or Flag or both. Now, what I think is going to be the popular choice is I think more people are going to play Johni Broome than are going to play Cooper Flag. Johni Broome is playing in a game with a better game total. He is coming in with seemingly no flaws. The only games that he did not play well was the Creighton game going against Kalkbrenner and the Alabama State game, which was a blowout, and he didn't need to play a whole lot of minutes. But he's pretty much been rock solid in every game that he's been healthy for the second half of the season. He's down here at $9,700, which is a low price tag for Johni Broome. So I think when you look at that matchup, I think Johni Broome is going to be very popular. Cooper Flag is going to be much less popular. So if you're looking to gain leverage, the first thing you can do right off the jump is to play Cooper Flag. And I get it, because who does Houston have that's going to guard Cooper Flag? I personally think that the matchup is going to be Joseph Tugler at the start of the game, but Tugler is a very foul-prone player, and I don't think that he's going to be able to stay on the floor and stay out of foul trouble if he's going to be asked to guard Cooper Flag the entire game. So I think Cooper Flag is going to have a favorable matchup. I know that the game environment is going to be much uglier. On paper, going up against Houston is an awful defensive matchup for anybody, but I think that Cooper Flag should be able to use his overall size, athleticism, talent to be a mismatch here in this game and to absolutely be able to go off. Now, one thing I do think is interesting is I do think it is plausible to build a lineup with both of them. I'm going to be doing this. I've been playing around with it a lot. What you end up with is an average salary remaining of about 5,100 on DraftKings. The problem is you're kind of priced out of playing a lot of the upper echelon guys. Like if you're going with Broom and Flag, unless you're going to stack in like multiple bench players, you're not going to be able to get up to Clayton or Knipple or Cryer or Hawk, I guess it should say. It's not going to be a super viable strategy to get up to those guys and play Broom and Flag. And also, I think there's going to be a pretty common build if you start off with Broom and Flag. Like I think a popular pairing partner with both those lineups is going to be Sion James and Dylan Cardwell, because they're guys that start and they're down there at 4,700 and 4,500, which would give you a little bit of salary flexibility. So I do think that if you're doing a Broom and Flag lineup, don't think that you're going to be unique just because you're doing Broom and Flag, because I think a lot of the builds that have both of them are going to feature the same pool of players. So now that we've gotten that taken care of, on that question, like I said, I'm going to be building combinations of both. I think that the field is going to be more on Broom. I am going to have to be more on Flag for that reason. I'm going to kind of zig, whereas others are going to zag. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this first game. So we got Florida taking on Auburn. KenPom has it as a total of 81-80. That is a game total of 161 points. That is quite staggering. Remember, these games are being played in the Alamo Dome in San Antonio. That is a football stadium, so you are going to have weird sight lines. You very well could have off shooting nights. I will die on the hill that basketball games should be played in basketball arenas. Like I don't see the benefit of playing a Final Four in a football stadium, with the exception of packing more people into the crowd, which I get. But I have a friend who, is a North Carolina fan who went to the Carolina Gonzaga game when North Carolina won the national championship. And he said that, he sat up in the nosebleeds and watched most of the game on the Jumbotron. And he said, the experience was, not necessarily being there to watch the game, but being there live in person to experience the feeling, because the feeling of euphoria when you win, when you're in person, is different from sitting at home on your TV. But for all intents and purposes, he was watching it on a TV at the arena, right? So anyway, that was my diatribe. Basketball should be played in basketball arenas. I will die on that hill. Anyway, this game total is 161. These two teams had played earlier in the season, and the game total was 171 points in that game. Florida won 90-81, and that was without Elijah Martin, who's Florida's probably their third best player. And in that game, Florida shot 39% from three, which is a little higher than their average, but not substantially higher than their average to say that they were like sun running or anything like that. And this game was in Auburn's gym. In that game, Florida had 4 more turnovers. They lost the turnover bout, but the rebounding margin was dead even. These are two good rebounding teams, so that makes a lot of sense. In terms of DraftKings scoring on the Florida side, Walter Clay had 44.5. Houck had 39.75. Condon had 38. Richard had 22.25. Aberdeen had 16, and Chinyelu had 11. Aberdeen was getting the start in place of Elijah Martin in that game. But it's interesting that both the bigs, Houck and Condon, both had 38 DraftKings points or more against Auburn. We traditionally think of Auburn as a tough matchup for bigs, although Jackson Kohler did just have a really good game against them in the Elite Eight. On the Auburn side, obviously slightly lower DraftKings scoring. Janai Broom had 46. Miles Kelly had 32.75. Todd Pettiford, 23.5. Chaney Johnson, 21.75. And Dylan Cardwell, 21. Denver Jones, 12.275, and Chad Baker-Mazara, 10.25. So really on the Auburn side, you really only had 2 guys that delivered you a lot of DraftKings points, and that was Janai Broom and it was Miles Kelly. Pettiford was just okay. Chaney Johnson and Dylan Cardwell were solid for their price tag, but only 21 DraftKings points. So I say all that to say this. This is a game with 161-point total. That's almost 40 points more than game number 2. So it is going to be very tempting to want to just load up just as many players from this game as you possibly can to take advantage of that higher total and more DraftKings points being scored. But I will caution you against this. I am pretty firm and hard on my rule. I never play more than 3 players on the same team. I stand by that. So like that eliminates a 7-1 stack because DraftKings and FanDuel will make you play 1 player from the other game. I just do not generally believe in playing 4 guys on one team. It is very, very difficult for 4 players on the same team to give you value from a DraftKings perspective. For instance, in that game against Auburn the first time, Clayton, Houck, and Condon all surpassed 4x value, but no one else on the team did. On the Auburn side, you had Broom and Kelly surpassing 4x value. Chaney Johnson and Dylan Cardwell did barely, but that's only because they were super cheap. And now also that you kind of run out of forwards if you do that, if you're going off of that, because Broom, Johnson, and Cardwell all forwards, Houck and Condon all forwards, right? So you would just be building your lineup in a really weird way to try to like do that for the last instance of these two teams playing, I just don't think it's likely that all 7 guys are going to get there. I would much rather play 6 from this game and take my chances on 2 guys from the other game, giving you 4x value, as opposed to trying to squeeze in 7, because remember, 4x value is always the goal. And really, if you want to win GPPs, you're going to need more than that here on this slate. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the Florida side, now that we've gotten the stacking portion in the previous matchup out of the way. Florida on KenPom is number 3 overall, 2nd in offensive efficiency, 10th in defensive efficiency, 59th in tempo. Interesting thing. So all of these teams, obviously they're teams 1 through 4 in KenPom. They're all top 10 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. I don't think I've ever seen that. That truly makes me think that any of these 4 teams could win, because you usually see that as a trait of a national champion. Now, Florida's relative weakness right now is turnovers. They have been losing the turnover margin in their NCAA tournament games, and their strength is rebounding. They've had a big advantage on the glass in their NCAA tournament games. They played an 8-man rotation against Texas Tech with the starting lineup of Clayton, Martin, Richard, Condon, and Chinyelu. They played Houck, Longton, and Aberdeen off the bench. But what ends up happening is Houck actually ends up being like the big man with the second most minutes. Let's go ahead and talk about their big men right now. So Thomas Houck, which I do believe is how you pronounce it. I've been saying it wrong all year, apparently. Houck has been really good in this NCAA tournament. In the last 2 games, he's played 32 and 30 minutes, put up 35 and 43 DraftKings points, been a super high usage player in those 2 games. Now, what's interesting is he's been doing it coming off the bench, but like it's been very clear that their preferred big man combo is Houck at the 4 and Condon at the 5, even though the starting combo is Condon at the 4 and Chinyelu at the 5. Why do they do it this way? I don't know. I've mentioned on the podcast before that I do coach high school basketball. We had a situation this year where one of our better players came off the bench, but it was because it made more sense for rotations that when you kind of cycle everybody's break around, he kind of ends up being in there like this for the second or third most minutes anyway. So maybe that's kind of how they do it with Houck. Maybe they're worried about him with foul trouble, or both him and Condon getting in foul trouble. I don't know. But I do think that it's intriguing to know that Houck has played a ton of minutes. He torched Auburn the last time they played. I think Houck is a really good option at 7,000. I think, to me, he is the best option among the Florida bigs. I do think that Condon is super intriguing. I think that Condon can be a little bit of a leverage play, because when you look at it, he's coming in at a super low price tag for him. He dealt with that ankle injury against Maryland, and I think that low performance brought his price tag down, but he dominated Auburn last time he played. I think that one way you want to attack these Auburn bigs is by having a big man who can operate in space and on the perimeter. It's kind of what worked for Michigan State with Jackson Kohler. Condon and Houck can both do that. I think they're both really solid plays. I do think you can play them both together. I do think that Houck is going to be more higher owned than Condon, but I very much like both of those 2 bigs for Florida. The starting center is Ruben Chinyelu. I think he would be kind of a leverage play based off of Houck or Condon getting in foul trouble. Like that would be how you would see max minutes for Chinyelu. Unfortunately, he's the one that usually sees himself in foul trouble. So I do think he's a little bit of a risky play because of the way they do the rotations, where Condon will play both the 4 and the 5. I have no problem pairing Chinyelu with either Houck or Condon. I would not play all 3 of those bigs together in any lineups, but I certainly wouldn't mind playing a combination of 2 of the 3. Longton is another one that he will play sparingly off the bench. He's played pretty much 10 minutes a game in the NCAA tournament games when you think about it and exclude the blowout of the Norfolk State game. I don't think he's the best option. You would be solely dependent on foul trouble from one of the other bigs if Handlocked were to be in the game. I would not pair him with Chinyelu because they have similar skill sets. I do think you could pair him with Houck or Condon and hope that the other one between Houck and Condon and Chinyelu gets in foul trouble for Handlocked to end up reaching value. Now, for the guards for Florida, Walter Clayton is their best one, right? And they played the crap out of their guards in the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games. Like, basically, if they're not in foul trouble, these guards are going to play a ton, and Aberdeen is going to spell all 3 of them. They're pretty much only going to play a 4-guard rotation. Clayton has been their best player all season long. He's been their usage leader all season long. He's great. Like, he's so good, and he's really good at, like, shooting these tough shots that just somehow go in. Of all the Florida guys, he probably has the biggest ceiling. I would, on paper, be worried about the matchup of him going against Denver Jones, because Denver Jones is an elite perimeter defender, but it didn't affect Clayton the first time. He had 44 DraftKings points in that game, had 6 rebounds and 9 assists, which is really good. So I really do think that, in this environment that's going to see a ton of points scored, that's going to be big time for peripheral stats, a guy like Clayton could absolutely, run that performance back and give you another 40 plus DraftKings points here on this slate. Elijah Martin and Will Richard are 2 of the toughest guys to get right, but they play all the minutes and they are pretty good. Like they're all like microwave shooters. They can get hot at a moment's notice. Richard's generally a better shooter than Martin, but Martin's generally a better peripheral stat guy. And Martin has just been kind of okay. in the NCAA tournament, but his price tag has been really solid. 6 of his last 8 games, he's been over 4x value at this price tag. That's pretty good. Will Richard is kind of the same way, where he's been over 4x value in 4 of his last 7. One thing I will say about these Florida guys is, as volatile as Martin and Richard are, neither, like in no games do all 3 Florida guards get there between Clayton, Martin, and Richard. I would not play all 3 of them in the same lineup. I do think that combinations of 2 of the 3 would work. Maybe if you get a Clayton foul trouble game, you could get a big game out of Martin or Richard or something like that, right? I do think they're all in play. Clayton is probably the one I'm going to have the most exposure to, but Martin and Richard certainly making my player pool. And then Aberdeen as the backup. He's another guy that, like I said, if you get foul trouble from one of the starters, you could absolutely get a big game from Aberdeen, but I would not play 3 Florida guards in the same lineup. Now, Auburn is turning into one of the more frustrating teams to target from a DraftKings perspective. For their overall profile, they're 4th overall on KenPom, 3rd on offensive efficiency, 8th in defensive efficiency, and 136th in tempo. These are the 2 fastest teams remaining, Florida and Auburn, so it's no shocker that this game is going to be a highest total. Their relative weakness, because they don't have a lot, is fouling. They play very physical defense. They can get guys in foul trouble, which is worrisome when you play a team like Florida, because guys like Walter Clayton Jr. can certainly draw a lot of fouls. Now, they basically, in their Elite 8 game against Michigan State, they basically played in a 7-man rotation. The Janai Broome injury got Chris Moore into the game. I don't think he would have played, if at all, if Janai Broome does not get hurt. So he would be like the Stone Min price, guy that might get a little bit of run, but I wouldn't play him. I can't recommend that. What they do is they start Denver Jones, Miles Kelly, Chad Baker-Mazara, Janai Broome, and Dylan Cardwell, but they play a ton of Pettiford and Johnson off the bench. What they love to do is they love to play all 7 guys fairly even minutes. Every member of that rotation play between 25 and 32 minutes against Michigan State. And what they love to do is they love to use Chaney Johnson to back up Cardwell and Broome. And when that happens, Johnson goes to the 4, and whoever's in between Broome and Cardwell goes to the 5. And then they pretty much just use Pettiford to spell Baker-Mazara, Kelly, and Jones, right? Now, what has ended up happening in this NCAA tournament is you have seen Janai Broome and Todd Pettiford be 1-2 in usage in each of their last 2 games. We already talked about Broome ad nauseum. This is a great spot for Broome. I do think that bigs against Florida is a way that you can target them. We saw JT Toppin and Darion Williams both have a lot of success against Florida in the Elite 8. We saw Derek Queen have a lot of success against Florida in the Sweet 16. So I do think that that's a position you can target the Gators at, and Broome is in just a great spot. Pettiford, as I was saying, has been 2nd in usage for this Auburn team in the NCAA tournament. He's really turning into their best offensive player as the season has gone on. In that first Florida game, we already mentioned how he had 23.5 DraftKings points, played 25 minutes, was 4-11 from the field. That's absolutely repeatable, right? He's playing more than 25 minutes now. He's shooting generally a higher percentage than that 4 of 11. And he's just, having more usage than he had before. So I do think that $6,400 is not a bad price tag for him. And I think he's definitely going to make a lot of my lineups. Now, here's what's frustrating with Auburn, though. Every rotational player from Broome all the way to Cardwell, the top 7, they have all had a game of 5x value or more in the NCAA tournament, and they've all had a 3x value game or below in the NCAA tournament, right? That's just super frustrating to target because you never really know who's going to go off and who is going to have the worst games, right? And there's been no better, example of that than Chad Baker-Mazara. He's down here at $5,900, which is the cheapest he's been all season, but he is now at 7 straight games of 22 DraftKings points or less. That is not going to cut it. I think he is a great GPP option, though. He's got a little J.R. Smith in him where you never know what you're going to get from him. He's also 25 years old. He's almost my age, which is kind of crazy that he's still in college. Anyway, that's another story. So you never really know what you're going to get from him, but every now and then you'll get a really good game. Every now and then he'll get hot. Every now and then he'll be the guy that just, takes these heat check shots and hits them, right? So if you're playing GPPs, he's got to make your player pool. I think he's going to be very lowly owned because of his recent performance. So I do think he is a guy that can win you a GPP. I'm not saying that he will because, we haven't seen it in a while, but he's certainly a guy that with his profile could absolutely give you a GPP winning performance at $5,900. Miles Kelly's kind of the same way, but I would personally rather play Baker-Mazara than Miles Kelly. Miles Kelly is very dependent on his 3-point shot. When he's making threes, he scores a lot of DraftKings points. When he's not, he doesn't, right? The only, the best peripheral stat game he's had all season has been the Michigan State game where he had 6 boards and 3 assists, put up 22 DraftKings points on only 1 made 3-point shot. The first game against Florida, as we mentioned, he made 3 threes. had 32 DraftKings points. Like when he makes his threes, he's a good play. You just don't know if he's going to make them or not. So I do think that him, like Baker Mazara, he's got to make your player pool if you're playing GPPs, but I don't necessarily think he's a super reliable play. Denver Jones is a guy that I'm kind of souring on. So basically, the Michigan game, he played really well. And you could kind of see it coming because you can see his minute totals have been super high, right? But he's really just this elite defensive player that I don't really think that they look to run a whole lot of their offense on, especially when he's guarding an elite point guard. Like you look at a lot of his best games, it comes when he's not guarding like a super elite player on the other side, right? Like a great example of this would be the Bama games. He put up 21 and 20 DraftKings points. He played a ton of minutes in those games. And, Bama plays at an insane tempo, but he was guarding Mark Sears, so he didn't really have the highest usage offensively, right? The game, he was guarding Walter Clayton, only 12 DraftKings points. When he's expending a lot of his energy on defense, he doesn't give you a whole lot on offense. And so the Michigan game, Michigan didn't really have a guard that he had to shut down. So he was great on offense, 29 DraftKings points, right? I think he's another guy, and y'all might be tired of me saying this, but like Pettiford, like Baker Mazara, like Kelly, he can win you a GPP, but he could also be very frustrating and give you a total dud. So these Auburn guys, like I'm telling you, I'm not playing more than 3 of them in the same lineup because it's very unlikely that all 3 of them end up going off, but there is a chance that all of them individually can go off. Chaney Johnson, we mentioned already, he's playing a ton of minutes as the backup to Broom/Cardwell. I think he's a very safe, conservative option at $4,900. And then Cardwell, he's had his issues with foul trouble, but he's a very good fantasy point per minute player. And, if we're seeing a good pace matchup against Florida, Florida's not the best team at defending bigs. If he's able to stay on the floor, he can give you a very good performance at $4,500. I think he's going to be very popular in all formats because he is the starting center at such a cheap price tag. All right, that does it for game number 1. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we're going to move to game number 2. Now, before we continue, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you reach out to me, and that is where I do tweet out all updates for the show. So follow me on there if you want to stay in the loop with what we're doing or ask any questions. Also, I'm in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Look, I cannot recommend this enough, y'all. We've got a bunch of really smart, really good people in the Fantasy Corner Discord who play DFS for a lot of different sports. So don't think just because college basketball is winding down that you don't need to join, because we've got guys who talk and play MLB, NFL, college football, hockey, NBA, college football, like it's all covered, right? So if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, talk strategies, talk lineups with, join the Fantasy. I promise you will not regret that. It's just a great community to be a part of. Also, if you want to know who actually makes my college basketball DFS lineups, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I post my core plays for every single college basketball DFS slate, as well as a write-up why they are my core plays, so you can get that information from somebody who does know what they're doing with this stuff. I can't guarantee that you can just plug them in and win thousands of dollars. It's not that easy. What I can guarantee is that you're going to get well-researched, well-thought-out, well-articulated points from somebody who knows college basketball. All right, let's go ahead now and dive into game number 2. So I was a little wrong on my math earlier, y'all, which as a high school math teacher kind of frustrates me a little bit that I did the quick math wrong. But anyway, we got Houston taking on Duke. The game total in this one, according to KenPom, is 134 points. I said that it was like 40 points less than Florida Auburn. It's more like 30. KenPom has it being Duke 68-66. Interestingly enough, these two teams played in the Sweet 16 last year. Much different roster for Duke. Houston's pretty much the same. In that game, Duke won 54-51. That's 105 total points scored. That ain't great, y'all. In that game, Kyle Filipowski was Duke's best player by far. Houston had no answer for him. And LJ Cryer was Houston's leading scorer. So let's go ahead and talk about the Houston side. So Houston is number 2 overall in KenPom. They are 10th on offensive efficiency, 1st in defensive efficiency, but 360th in tempo. They're one of the slowest teams in all the nation. Couple that with their defense, they're a very difficult team to target for DFS purposes. Now, here's where you get with their profile, though. They are a super efficient shooting team from three-point land. They're one of the best in the nation, but they don't shoot a lot of them. Really, what they like to do on offense is they like to play through the post with Joanne Roberts, or they end up going ISO with LJ Cryer or Milos Uzan generating a contested mid-range shot or floater. They don't take a whole lot of like open 2-pointers. So their 2-point percentage is like super, super low because they're just not generating efficient looks from 2. But because of the way they play that offense, because they're always aggressive, always attacking, or always playing through the post, they generate a lot of open 3-pointers. And they have 3 guys in particular that are really efficient at knocking those 3-pointers down. Their relative weakness for their profile is defensive rebounding. They are an elite offensive rebounding team, but they are outside the top 100 in defensive rebounding. And oh, by the way, this is not a tall team. Not at all. They don't have any players in their rotation above 6'8". Terrence Arsenault is actually the only one in between 6'4" and 6'8". So they don't really have a lot of size at all. More on that. Why might that hurt them in a second? But in the 3 of their 4 losses are to teams ranking top 60 in height. So they've lost to some taller teams that they played this year. That is not a good sign when you're going up against Duke. So what I think might happen in this one is I think Houston might simply be outmatched by Duke's size, athleticism, and height. And if that happens, what I think you're going to see is I think you're going to see a big LJ Cryer game. Because when Roberts can't post up, when they got to rely on somebody to create shots in the perimeter, it's LJ Cryer that does it. And we saw that in the Tennessee game. He ended up with 34 DraftKings points in that game. LJ Cryer is probably going to be my favorite player on this Houston side because I think that he's a guy that can generate offense off the dribble on the attack, and he's a pretty good catch and shoot player as well. I think he's the guy that can generate their offense going up against this tough matchup that is this Duke team. Now, I mentioned their rotation already, right? So they play an 8-man rotation. Basically, they start Milo Suzanne at the 1, LJ Cryer at the 2, Emmanuel Sharp at the 3, Juwan Roberts at the 4, Joseph Tugler at the 5. They will play Malik Wilson as kind of this backup wing, as well as Terrence Arsenault. Javier Francis is the only backup big. So let's talk about the guards since we already started talking about Cryer. So Milos Uzan is like the peripheral stat king on this team. When he is in games, he records a lot of peripheral stats. He is just the best one at it, right? And he's led them in usage in one NCAA tournament game. Cryer actually had 2. And then I believe Roberts had the other one. Yes, Roberts had the other one. So Uzan did lead them in usage in that Purdue game. He was great in that game, 35 DraftKings points. But the thing is, with him being a peripheral stat guy, we want to target Uzan in games that are pace up against poorer defenses. This is not one of those cases. So I think that this is kind of a narrow pathway for him, but I do see a way where he could get there through his peripheral stats. He's also a great catch and shoot three-pointer. All 3 of the Houston guards, Cryer, Uzan, and Sharp, all shoot over 40% from 3. So Sharp, offensively, he's kind of just a catch and shoot player. Like you look at the Tennessee game, he was 4 for 10 from 3. He was 6 for 14 from the field. So well over half of his shots were 3-pointers, right? In the Purdue game, 8 threes, 14 field goal attempts. Not well over, but over half of his shots were 3-pointers, right? He's primarily a catch and shoot player. And if he hits them, he's pretty good from a DraftKings perspective. He's been back-to-back games over 23 DraftKings points now. But the problem is he's not going to get those same catch and shoot opportunities against Duke that he's had against everybody else. So we saw this with Alabama. Alabama's catch and shoot players going up against Duke did not fare very well because Duke has such immense length that when they're closing out and when they're contesting, it's just a different level of contest on the shot. It's just a lot harder to hit it, right? Like if you played high-level basketball, you know exactly what I'm talking about when somebody's tall is closing out on your jumper, right? So I worry about that with Emmanuel Sharp. He would be by far my least of the 3 favorite starting Houston guards of playing him. Malik Wilson coming off the bench. I don't really know what to make of him. I do know this. If you throw out the Purdue game where he got hurt, he's been over 16 DraftKings points in 5 straight games if you throw out that Purdue game. And you really need 17 for him to feel good about hitting value. So with him being the spell guy for all 3 guards, I do think that there's a chance he could give you pretty solid value at $4,300. And I think he's a pretty safe play for that reason. I also really like the idea of playing Terrence Arsenault. So we mentioned this earlier. Who on Houston can guard Cooper Flagg? Well, if Tugler's not the answer, it's going to have to be Arsenault. Arsenault stands 6'6". He's probably their most versatile wing defender. I think he might be a guy that they could try to get minutes out of to guard Cooper Flagg. Now, he's still going to have to score on the offensive end to get us DraftKings points, but his defense could get him on the floor, and for that reason, he's a very intriguing value play to me at $3,900. Now, for the Houston Bigs, Juwan Roberts is the one that they're going to play through in the post, right? But when you look at his stats against good post defenders, it ain't great, bub. Tennessee only played 60 minutes, only put up 19 DraftKings points. Kansas against Hunter Dickinson, he played 36 minutes, but he only put up 24 DraftKings points. Cincinnati going up against Dylan Mitchell and Aziz Bandago, 22 minutes, 17 DraftKings points, right? Like you look at some of the better interior defenders that he's played, and it just hasn't been a whole lot of stats that he's put up. He's been really great against these teams that play small ball lineups, against teams that don't know how to defend the post, but against teams that do, he has not been the best option in DraftKings, right? Look at Alabama early in the season, 38 minutes, 15 DraftKings points. Like, that's just not what we want to see, right? So I'm a little bit worried about Roberts. I worry about him having his normal post game against the Duke front court, and I also worry about him fouling on the other end. 2 of the last 3 games, he's been in foul trouble. So I worry about that with him. I do think he's an option at 6,200 because obviously there's a huge pathway for him to have success if they just play through him in the post a ton, but I just don't see that happening, right? Joseph Tugler is the guy that we talked about of where he is going to be probably guarding Cooper Flagg on the other end, but Tugler doesn't play a whole lot of minutes because Tugler can get in some foul trouble. If anybody on Houston, he's the most likely to get in foul trouble. But when he does play a lot of minutes, he can put up a lot of DraftKings points because he's a great rebounder. He'll block some shots. He'll get some steals. If you have faith that he can stay out of foul trouble, playing him at $5,200 makes a lot of sense to me. And then their backup big is Javier Francis. I just don't have any interest. He's a great fantasy point per minute guy, but I don't think that's going to be the case against Duke. And I think they're going to want to get as much out of Robertson Tugler as they possibly can. I don't see them turning to Francis unless they have to. So maybe that could be the narrative to play him, right? Is, hey, like Robertson Tugler crap the bed, so I'm going to play Francis. Like maybe he can make your player pool, but I'm just not that confident in him having a whole lot of success in this game. All right, now let's talk about the Duke side. So we've already talked about Cooper Flagg. I'm going to spare you that one, right? Their overall profile is interesting, though. So of their overall profile, they are the first overall team in KenPom, first in offensive efficiency, best all time in offensive efficiency, fourth in defensive efficiency, and 268th in tempo. They are the tallest team in all of Division I. Every single rotational player is 6'5" or taller. That can give Houston and their smaller guards and their smaller, relatively speaking, bigs some issues, right? Now, what's interesting is in that Alabama game, which kind of got lopsided near the end, they only played 6 players double-digit minutes. It was their normal starting 5 of Proctor, James, Temple, Flagg, and Malawach. And then you saw Caleb Foster play more than 10 minutes off the bench. Ngongba and Evans and Gillis all played sparingly. Right. So in that game, here's the most important takeaway. We know Cooper Flagg's going to play all the minutes because he's Cooper Flagg. He's going to be the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. He's the best player in all of college basketball for my money. Kaman Malawach, we have talked about all season long. We've hammered this home. He's a great fantasy point per minute player because of what he does on the boards, because of how he blocks shots. And now they're starting to use him offensively. He's become a lob threat offensively. And in the Bama game, he played more than 30 minutes. That's not something they do with Kaman Malawach. So if he's going to continue to play more than 30 minutes, I think he's one of the best DFS options on the slate. With the way Houston works, he's going to be able to camp by the rim guarding one of Houston's bigs. I think a key feature of a team, if they're going to beat Duke, is they need to be able to get Malawach out of the paint because he is just a demon at blocking shots when he's able to stay in the paint. Houston does not have a stretch big, so I do not see them, getting him out of there, and I think that he's going to give them big-time issues in the paint, blocking shots, helping defensively, getting boards, wreaking havoc. I think Malawach is probably, aside from Flagg, my favorite play on this Duke side. Now, everything that I say about Malawach, if you think that he could get in foul trouble, play Patrick Ngongba. Now, what we did see in that Bama game was he only played 6 minutes because of the fact that Malawach was better, right? Like Malawach was just really good in that game. And Malawach didn't get in foul trouble. Malawach gets in foul trouble, and Ngongba might find his way back in the rotation playing big minutes. We also saw Gillis and Brown kind of split the remaining minutes between Flagg and Malawach's breaks. Brown's an elite level defender. If they feel like they need defense, then they're going to put in Malik Brown, whereas Gillis is the one of all those bigs that can space the floor. I don't really have a whole lot of faith in playing either of those guys. I would much rather stick with Malawach or play a little bit of Patrick Ngongba. One thing that I do find interesting, we talked about how Houston is a slightly weak offensive or defensive rebounding team, which would favor Duke on the offensive glass. And Kaman Malawach is one of the best in the nation, 7th in the nation, in fact, at offensive rebounding rate at 17%. So there is a pathway where he could really have some offensive rebounds in this game. We kind of saw that with Felix Okpara in the first half for Tennessee until they started kind of getting frantic because they were coming from behind. But you can get offensive boards on this Houston team, and Malawach would be a guy who could take advantage of that. Now, among the Duke guards, Con Knipple to me is the best play out of all of them. So we kind of talked about this theory with Uzan that, he's kind of a peripheral stat guy. When he gets a lot of peripheral stats, he's in a pace-up environment, he puts up a lot of DraftKings points. We talked about that before the Bama game, and boom, 40 DraftKings points for Con, right? So this is not a game where he's likely to put up a lot of peripheral stats, but this is a game where he's going to have a really good matchup because Con Knipple's about 6'7". He's going to be guarded by one of the smaller Houston guards. He's going to have a size advantage. He's going to have a matchup advantage. And I would say if you don't think Cooper Flagg is going to have a matchup advantage, play Con Knipple because it's more than likely than not that if Cooper Flagg is not going off, a lot of their scoring, a lot of their offense generation is going to be coming from Con Knipple in that game. Now, when you look at usage, For the NCAA tournament, Cooper Flagg is averaging a 35% usage rate, which is insane. Con Knipple is second on the team at 21%. So like I said, if you're not going to play Flagg, I think it makes a lot of sense to play Knipple here on this Duke side. Now, Proctor and James are the last two guys I'm going to talk about here. So Proctor has been great in this NCAA tournament, 4 of 5 games. 4 of his last 5, including the conference championship game against Louisville, have been over 28 DraftKings points. 3 of the 4 in the NCAA tournament have been over 30. Like, he's shooting the ball really, really well. We mentioned this on the podcast before the Alabama game. He could be due for some shooting regression, but it hasn't happened yet. But what we do know about Proctor is that he's going to get looks from 3. He's going to be much bigger than his Houston opponent that's guarding him, and he's going to play nearly the entire game. He's played at least 36 minutes in the last 2 games. So I don't mind Proctor at 6,600. So, to kind of like go all the way back to what I was talking about from the start, I don't necessarily think this is a game that you want to stack, but I do think that you can make some really good arguments for a lot of pieces on this Duke side to fit in 1 or 2 pieces from Duke here into your lineups. Now, Sion James is the last starter. He's an elite level defender. That's why he plays a lot of minutes. He's only $4,700. I think he's going to be probably one of the most popular value plays on the slate because people, when they build lineups, y'all, they like to feel comfortable. They like to play guys that they know are going to get minutes, that they know are going to be on the floor, that they know are going to get DraftKings points, right? And Sion James at $4,700 is that comfortable value click. So I see him being very popular for this one. But I do think you have to be a little concerned about the game environment with how slow of a pace it's going to be played at and how he's also, like Con Knipple, kind of a peripheral stat guy, averages 4 boards and 3 assists per game. But with Sion James being their best perimeter defender, he's going to be asked to play a whole lot of minutes, and he's going to be out there. And I think it's quite likely that he gets you that 4x value at $4,700. I don't think it's likely that he gets you a GPP winning score. Caleb Foster is the guard that will spell all 3 of the starting guards. Played 14 minutes against Baylor, looked really good. Against Bama, looked really good. Put up 12.5 DraftKings points. Not a terrible play, but like, you're going to need serious foul trouble, and you're going to need him to make a few threes for that to happen. I don't think it's super likely that he gives you a big time DraftKings game. All right, y'all, that is good for both the Final Four games. Hopefully y'all can tell by how I've been talking about it. I'm really excited. I think this is going to be a great Final Four. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it turns out. If this video helped you in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review the audio. Hopefully we gave you guys all the information you need in order to build some winning DraftKings lineups, build some player props out, or make some parlays with your bets. Personally, if I'm picking the games, I'm sticking with the predictions that I had at the start of the NCAA tournament. I'm rolling with Florida over Auburn. I'm rolling with Duke over Houston. And then I'm rolling with Duke Monday night, which is scary to say, but I do have a future on them to win the national championship, so I would not be mad if that ended up happening. Even though, as somebody who's grown up in North Carolina, grew up disliking Coach K, grew up not liking Duke basketball. They beat Texas in the NCAA tournament one year, and I really hated them after that. I think Duke's going to be cutting down the nets. And I got to say, I kind of find this Duke team less hateable than the usual Duke teams. I don't know if it's just the absence of Coach K or if it's because I really like and respect Cooper Flagg, but hey, I don't find this Duke team as hateable. If you guys are wondering about my survivor pool that I mentioned last week, I did middle it where I did 1 entry Auburn-Houston and 1 entry Auburn-Tennessee. I wish I would have had more conviction to just go both of them Auburn-Houston, but now I'm at a point where I've got 1 survivor entry alive, and I've got Florida and Duke remaining, and I'm going to pick it out exactly what I just said is going to happen. I am picking Florida to beat Auburn on Saturday, and then I'm going to save Duke to beat Florida on Monday night. That is my plan, and I also plan on hedging now that I know I've gotten this far. I know that I've got a chance to split some serious money. I'm going to be putting some money on Auburn to cover the spread in game 1 and potentially Houston to cover the spread in game 2, depending on how it plays out. But anyway, that is going to be it for this episode, y'all. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to this Final Four. Looking forward to like one last hurrah for the college basketball season in terms of a DraftKings slate. Really excited about it. And I wish you guys the best of luck. Best of luck to you guys here on this Final Four slate. Have a lot of fun watching it. Come back for us because we'll be back talking about the national championship game Monday night. So make sure you come back for that. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. But that is going to do it here for this episode, y'all. Best of luck to you guys in the Final Four slate. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time.